Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Stephanie Gagnon Rodriguez, our Senior Manager for Regional Programs at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. I am really excited for today's discussion on bringing home the benefits of federal clean energy investments. Since the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, we've seen what many people are calling an American clean energy manufacturing renaissance. Enabled by new federal funding and tax credits, companies are announcing billions in new domestic manufacturing investments to produce clean energy products, from electric vehicles and batteries, to heat pumps, to offshore wind turbine components, to iron air batteries. Proactive state-level policy can complement federal programs to attract investment, create jobs, and build community infrastructure that can enable the benefits of these new projects to flow to communities. Since 2020, our Regional Roundtable program has worked with local leaders to identify place-based economic opportunities in the low-carbon transition and to generate innovative policy solutions that can help communities take advantage of these opportunities to their fullest extent. So today, I'm really excited to sit down with two state-level leaders to learn more about the great work that they've been doing to capitalize on these opportunities and to bring home the benefits of federal clean energy investments to their communities. So before we get started, some quick housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be on our YouTube page. You'll also receive a follow-up in an email from Zoom. We will, at the end of the conversation, with about 15 minutes left, take some questions and answer, or take some questions for the panelists. So there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can use that to submit a question. Please feel free to submit that at any time throughout the conversation, and we'll make sure we take a look at that and try to get to it by the end of the conversation. I would be remiss if I didn't remind you to follow us on social media, and the Regional Roundtable program has a new monthly newsletter that we invite you to subscribe to. The link to subscribe to that is in the chat. So with that, I'd like to now turn to Peter Trousdale, our Associate Policy Fellow for Regional Programs, to give a brief overview of the Roundtable program and our work to date. And then after that, we'll get to our discussion with Delegate Rip Sullivan from the Virginia House of Delegates and Jonathan Smith, the Senior Chief Deputy Director for the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. But first, over to Peter.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to have the chance to give some more background and examples from the Roundtable program, discuss some common themes that come up in these conversations, and outline the recent government investments supercharging the growth of clean energy industries. So the Roundtable program was developed in 2020 as a platform to engage with leaders in different states and local communities across the country. These events are a chance to learn directly from those best positioned to speak to their local opportunities, challenges, and support needs, while elevating voices that may not always be included in the federal policymaking discussion. They also provide as a way to continue building a base of support for climate solutions and the new economic opportunities that come from them. So the roundtables provide a means to proactively engage with communities facing changes from the energy transition. This includes both those experiencing new gains as industries build production facilities or clean energy projects, as well as those that will need to proactively develop new strategies to sustain their economies as fossil fuel production wanes. Participants in the roundtables encapsulate a full range of stakeholders: local, state, and federal policymakers, businesses of all sizes, community organizations and nonprofits, leading academics and issue experts, trade associations and labor organizations, as well as investors in philanthropy. Outputs from these conversations will include takeaways from the discussions themselves, policy recommendations and policy briefs, as well as subsequent advocacy campaigns at the federal and state levels. Participating in the roundtables is a great opportunity to represent your organizational interests in a unique problem-solving format that can directly affect policy recommendations that will be included in federal level advocacy efforts. It also provides an opportunity to access a diverse range of stakeholders across the clean energy ecosystem, highlight organizational efforts, and develop a community of practice for crucial climate topics and industries. So through these roundtables, a few common themes have emerged. If we could go to the next slide, please. First, there's broad optimism about new opportunities for the clean energy economy that transcends partisan divide. Participants of all partisan affiliations support some level of federal, state, and local policy intervention to realize the local economic growth opportunities of a transition to a low-carbon economy. These include creating new jobs, attracting investment, promoting local economic growth, enhancing local resilience, and improving livability in communities. Participants viewed good policy design as including strong federal funding programs that incentivize and support investment in low-carbon solutions, while also allowing for sufficient flexibility and adaptability for states and local governments to direct resources to best serve their local contexts. Second, proactive, authentic, and comprehensive community engagement is paramount to successful project development. Early engagement that helps build community buy-in will help prevent delays and obstructions in the permitting process from unaddressed community concerns. This engagement at the community level can help promote better facility design that reflects local conditions and needs. Third, workforce development is crucial to the success of decarbonization efforts. Most industries are facing challenges to hire enough workers with the appropriate skills and qualifications. This is exacerbated by a significant anticipated growth across the clean energy sector, coupled with ever-evolving nature of new technologies that's expected to put significant strain on the clean energy workforce in the coming decades. So participants emphasize several key principles to improving workforce development, including coordinated, accessible, and flexible workforce development programs, direct coordination between program providers and employers to produce transparent understandings of the skills necessary for the future, and recruitment from and support for populations that have historically been prevented from accessing good jobs. Two of our most recent roundtables included in-depth discussion on workforce development and community engagement. And we're lucky to have representatives from those roundtables joining later today for the panel. So in February, next slide, please, we hosted an event in Detroit, Michigan. In the lead up, we engaged in an extensive scoping process with local stakeholders to identify what the priorities were for the industry and the communities. So we tailored the day's agenda to achieve the goals of the participants. The event brought together businesses and workforce development experts in the state to coordinate Michigan's training programs and workforce needs. By spotlighting different programs across the state and engaging in innovative and collaborative exercises, the roundtable provided a space to energize action by developing big picture goals and small interim steps. The conversation coalesced around long-term goals and near-term actions that can be found in our takeaways from the day and the resulting policy brief. In the months since the roundtable, Michigan has seen a lot of momentum and announcements in the workforce development space, which will be highlighted later today. Later this year in June, we hosted a roundtable on long-duration energy storage in Virginia. Next slide, please. Our Virginia roundtable brought together businesses, state energy officials, community organizations, and labor to discuss how LDES can help meet Virginia's clean energy targets. The roundtable served to highlight the benefits of LDES to local leaders, including increased grid reliability, resource adequacy, and community resilience. Following the roundtable, we developed policy recommendations that provide state-level context to our national-level LDES working group. And we published a subsequent policy brief that can be found on our roundtable webpage. Recommendations included educating stakeholders on LDES use cases, engaging communities proactively and comprehensively, and properly valuing the benefits of LDES in electricity markets. So we've been hosting roundtables like these two I just mentioned since 2020, but recent federal legislation incentivizing climate-aligned industries have supercharged the urgency of these conversations. Next slide, please. In a recent paper by the Rhodium Group and MIT's Clean Investment Monitor tallying the 2-year impact of the Inflation Reduction Act, they found that from the second half of 2022, when the IRA was implemented, through the first half of this year, actual business and consumer investment in clean technologies and infrastructure totaled $493 billion, a 71% increase from the 2-year period preceding the legislation. Investment in manufacturing, clean energy, and transportation technology posted the fastest growth, totaling $89 billion in the post-IRA period, more than quadruple the $22 billion invested in the 2 years prior to the IRA's enactment. The analysis also shows that this public sector investment is catalyzing private sector investment as well. Since the IRA became law, the federal government has invested $78.4 billion in clean technologies, almost entirely in the form of tax credits, which total 16% of the total investment tracked from mid-2022 to mid-2024. Meanwhile, private investment in clean technologies is estimated to be 5 to 6 times larger than public investment. This underscores the catalytic impact of the IRA's federal incentives, especially taxes, in encouraging private investment. We're seeing this investment growth in the states where representatives and economic development leaders that we're hosting today will be talking about in our panel. According to the White House's Investing in America fact sheet, under the Biden administration, Virginia has seen $2 billion in investments in clean energy manufacturing and infrastructure and $1 billion in clean power. Meanwhile, Michigan has seen $24 billion in announced investments in EV and battery manufacturing. With all this federal and private sector investment, we need to make sure that these investments transfer the best possible outcomes to communities. Now we have two state-level leaders to discuss how their states are implementing federal and private sector investment and what their states are doing to access the benefits and ensure the best outcomes for communities hosting these projects. It's important to be clear-eyed about the on-the-ground implementation challenges that states are facing and how to navigate the difficulties and access the benefits of an economy in transition. So we're excited to hear from these leaders now in a panel moderated by our Senior Manager for Regional Programs, Stephanie.
Great. Thanks so much, Peter. Great job laying out the work that we've done to date and some of the common threads that we've heard emerge from across the many conversations we've had on these issues in the past several years. A reminder to our participants, you can learn more about the program on our website and subscribe to our monthly newsletter for continual updates. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our discussants for today's conversation, two state leaders who are working every day to realize the benefits of climate and clean energy investments and ensure that they reach their communities and workers. First, Delegate Richard Rip Sullivan represents Virginia's 6th District in the House of Delegates, where he has served since 2014. Delegate Sullivan led the effort to pass the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which put Virginia on a path to 100% clean energy by 2045. He's been a climate and clean energy leader, supporting wind, solar, energy efficiency, and transportation electrification, including working to get more electric vehicles on the roads. Our other discussant, Jonathan Smith, is Senior Chief Deputy Director for the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, where he works to advance the office's strategic goals and vision for Michigan's economic future, and where he leads the Community and Worker Economic Transition Office. He has served since 2020 and brings more than 2 decades of experience in policy development, legal analysis, regulatory oversight, management, and strategic stakeholder engagement. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to get us started. So I'd like to turn to you both and just ask you to tell us a little bit about some of your recent work on climate and clean energy. We'd love to hear some things that you're very proud of. And sorry, before I turn to you, I'll just let everyone know we are taking questions. So as we have the conversation, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box. Delegate Sullivan, over to you.
Well, good afternoon, Stephanie, and everyone on the webinar. It's great to be with you. I really appreciate the invitation. You mentioned the Virginia Clean Economy Act. We passed that in 2020, and I was pleased to help lead that effort. And it really did. I think it's fair to say in just 4 short years, it really has transformed Virginia. We've got a long way to go, but prior to the passage of that act, we were sort of an also-ran in the clean energy space. When we passed the Clean Economy Act, it sort of vaulted Virginia to the front of the pack, certainly in terms of southern states, but I think it's fair to say nationally as well. We're very proud of the progress we've made. When you pass a bill that has a 25 or 30-year time frame, you know that things are going to change even the very next year. We all know the rapidly developing technological world we're living in. And in my state, and I don't think this is different than a lot of other states, we're also seeing a huge surge in demand. We certainly knew that was going to come to insofar as it relates to the electrification of transportation. But with the, I want to say the advent, they weren't new. We knew about them in 2020, but with the explosive growth of data centers, and data centers in Virginia are a big challenge right now. Virginia is sort of the data center capital of the world, certainly of the United States, and that's adding new challenges to meeting our goals. So we now have sort of 2 challenges. One was to meet our original goals and how we were going to get there, and now those new factors have come into play, which means we need to redouble our efforts, roll up our sleeves, and find new ways to meet those challenges. In terms of recent successes or things that I've been working on, and particularly as it relates to federal dollars and such, one of the things that Virginia had been slow on the uptake was accessing some of these federal dollars. We've only recently taken the steps to create a green bank in Virginia, for instance, and a lot of the grants and loans that are available through the Infrastructure Act require the existence of a green some sort of state skin in the game. And just recently, the governor finally did that. We've had some back and forth in Virginia as to, we wanted to do it through legislation. He wanted to do it through executive order. The bottom line is that it appears that we're now going to have a green bank set up. So one of the things I've been concerned about from the very beginning, since the passage of the BIL, was to make sure that Virginia was participating as fully as we could. And the fact is that we haven't been, at least insofar as some of those loans and grants are concerned. So we're going to be able to do that. The same was true with the NEVI program. Candidly, I was concerned that we would miss that opportunity. I was really glad when I learned that our Department of Energy had put in all its paperwork, and we are in fact participating in NEVI. One of the things I've been concerned about, Virginia is again, not unlike a lot of states. We've got a lot of highly urbanized and suburbanized parts of the state, and some, frankly, most of Virginia by landmass at least, is a very rural state. And when you look at how the NEVI program is proceeding, it is understandably focused on interstate highway corridors in terms of where charging stations are going to go. So I've been working hard to try to ensure and to get some state dollars, some state skin in that game, to make sure that the entire state, urban and rural, proximate to interstates, but most of Virginia is not proximate to interstates. How do we go about making sure that the transition to electric vehicles is something that all Virginians can participate in? Because of course we need all Virginians to participate in. So I've been working very hard, frankly. I've put this bill in, I think, at least 3 times so far. I'll be putting it in again this year. And each year we've gotten a little closer to getting it done. Last year we actually got it through, but it got sort of stuck in some of the budget switches. So I'll be putting that bill in again this year, again, just to sort of make sure that the entire state's going to be able to participate. One more thing I'll tell you, and I don't want to take all of Jonathan's time. Last year, one of the things, again, sort of advancing the Clean Economy Act, making sure we're on track. We passed a bill in Virginia expanding our shared solar program. Most states call it community solar. For some reason, we call it shared solar in Virginia. But the good news is, the one we passed originally, now three years ago, maybe 4 years ago, was fully subscribed, which is a really good sign. So what we had to do was expand it and increase its availability. We also expanded it into the area of the state that's served by a different utility. The major investor-owned utility in Virginia is Dominion. Appalachian Power has a lot of Virginia, and we expanded it. So as I suggested earlier in my remarks, we passed the Clean Economy Act, but we have to keep tweaking it. We have to keep expanding it. We have to keep accelerating it. And when we get to long-term energy, long-duration storage, I'm happy to talk about that, because I think that's yet another area in the Clean Economy Act where we need to keep retooling it and accelerating it and making sure that we're going to reach our goals. So that's probably more than you wanted to hear, Stephanie. And I don't want to step on Jonathan's time, so I'm happy to step aside and listen to the great things that are going on in Michigan.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks. I think definitely thinking about how technology continues to shift over time and develop, and things that we hadn't even considered to be real possibilities are now suddenly huge problems that we have to think about. So thank you so much for that. Jonathan, over to you. Tell us about some of the great work that you're doing in Michigan.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie, and thanks everybody for participating in this event. So the work that I've been doing for the last year is related to the creation of this new Community and Worker Economic Transition Office. It was created as part of the clean energy package of laws that Michigan passed last year. We were a few years behind you, Rip, but set a more ambitious goal. So we were hoping to get to 100% clean energy by 2040. The bill also contained a number of permitting reforms necessary to get utility scale energy projects complete in Michigan. And then it created this new office, which is designed to help make sure that our communities, our workers, and our employers in the state of Michigan who are going to be impacted by clean energy transitions in the auto sector and the utility sector, that they have the tools they need to be prepared for those transitions, not just to mitigate harm or be on the lookout for potential negative consequences, but really to position stakeholders in our state to benefit from the growth opportunities that we know are going to come about as a result of the more widespread adoption of clean energy technologies in those two sectors. The work we've been doing for the last year has been really focused on developing strategies and tools that will allow us to proactively think about these future economic changes and start to position folks now to be prepared to take advantage. And so one of the recent accomplishments I think I'm most excited about has come about as a result of a strong partnership that we've had from the Biden-Harris administration. One of the programs that was authorized under the Inflation Reduction Act was a large grant program, $2 billion for retooling for auto facilities so that they could retool their factories and retrain their workforce to go from making internal combustion engine vehicles and parts and components to making batteries and EVs and the parts and components for those vehicles. And the original program as designed was for very large projects, projects for our large automakers like General Motors or Stellantis, or for the large global tier one auto suppliers. And we know in Michigan, we have thousands of independent small manufacturers who are suppliers to the auto industry. And we knew from talking to them and to our industry partners like MEMA and regional chambers and economic development organizations that there's going to be a lot of need for small suppliers, that the smallest suppliers were particularly vulnerable to some of these economic transitions. And we know that's true, not just because of clean energy transitions, but for the changing economy we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years, where we've had increased automation and globalization and supply chain shifts to the south. And so we advocated with the White House and with the Department of Energy that they create a program for states to tap into some of those dollars and subgrant it out to small manufacturers. We were successful. The Department of Energy they took $50 million from that $2 billion program and put it into a state partnership fund. And Michigan is going to be awarded over 22 million of those $50 million for our subgrant program for small manufacturers. So that's really exciting. We have had similar collaboration on things like the designation of Michigan as an EV workforce hub, so that we can get greater collaboration and support from federal agencies like DOE and DOL as we work to stand up new workforce programming and address some of the gaps in the federal funding that we do get for workforce. And we've also seen outside of kind of my work in the transition office, a really huge surge of investment in the state in some of these new technologies. We saw the Palisades nuclear plant will be the first decommissioned nuclear plant to come back online to support our clean energy goals. We're seeing recent announcements and investments into solar manufacturing capacity in the Flint and Saginaw region. So, been a very exciting last couple of years here in the state as we've seen just a massive amount of new investment and new job creation. And if you think about the manufacturing history here, it is one in which the economy in the state of Michigan has been challenged in the past by some of the economic transition that's happened. And it's very exciting because what we're seeing right now is, unlike some of the other trends in tech like that were software enabled or software based, so many of these clean energy technological advancements really are the kind of hard tech and manufacturing based opportunities that Michigan is really well poised to take advantage of. So very exciting time and a lot of really great things happening.
Yeah, thanks. Such an exciting time. I think all of those announcements that you're talking about, it's really exciting to hear all of those coming through, and then also to know how many people are going to be able to get to work on those and benefit really from the federal dollars and the state dollars that are coming to their communities. So on that, Jonathan, I think we're going to stick with you. Can you talk a little bit more about the impact to local communities of accelerating these investments? I know we've got the workforce side, we've got folks who live around projects who might benefit from them. What's the benefit, and how can we make sure that we're making sure that people actually get access to those benefits?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges the last few years, we've seen these generational investments, whether it was all the way back to the rescue plan, the infrastructure law, the Chips and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, massive amount of investment in our communities. But one of the challenges has been that the communities that I think we all hope have benefit the most from those investments. Oftentimes, they have the least capacity to actually apply for some of these competitive grant opportunities, to develop a sophisticated strategy to use some of these federal resources to diversify their economy, to invest in resiliency and health of their community, and to even administer some of these programs if they are successful. And so, what we have done to try to address some of that at the state level is a couple of things. One, we've been investing in technical assistance and making resource navigation easier. And so we co-invested with the Michigan Municipal League to create a digital hub called myfundinghub.org, where if you are a local government, city, a township, a county, you can go to this website. You can look for all of the state and federal grant opportunities, and it's a lot easier to navigate. You can say, I want to see everything related to broadband or workforce, or you can sort by category. And then for Justice 40 communities and other particularly vulnerable communities, there's some additional technical assistance, like real human being sort of hands-on assistance for folks as they get prepared to apply for some of those grants. We've also the state made a $330 million investment into a fund called the Make It in Michigan Competitiveness Fund that is designed to provide a source of local match for organizations as they pursue federal grants. A lot of the DOE grants or they require a 50% match for some of our small businesses, businesses in vulnerable communities. It can be difficult to come up with the matching funds for some of these projects. And so we have put $330 million of state general fund made that available for these communities and for small businesses so that they can successfully pursue and draw down some of these federal grants. And so, we're doing a lot on our end to try to invest in that local capacity to make it easier. And we've also had a really great partnership with the Biden-Harris administration, creating a way for us to share some of the feedback that we're hearing from local communities around ways that agencies can make it easier for them to get access to some of these resources. I think having done 20 years in DC doing federal policy, I'm cognizant of the fact that oftentimes when local communities show up to talk to their federal representatives, whether it's in Congress or in the administration, they're often there to put their best foot forward and to tell the happy, great news story about their local community. They don't often want to put front and center some of the challenges that they face. And so, allowing the state to be able to be an intermediary for some of these communities to share some of the challenges to help make it easier for our federal agency partners to reduce some of the challenge associated with navigating some of their bureaucracy. That's a role that we think, is a great one for us to play. And we've had a lot of partnership with the administration and that kind of two-way dialogue.
Yeah, that's great. That's something that we hear, Peter mentioned we've been doing these roundtables kind of all over the country. We hear that all the time from communities saying, we would love to access these federal programs and we don't even know where to start. We don't have enough staff. We don't have enough budget. So I think that's so great that you guys are working on making sure that these programs are really more accessible and more understandable. And then even that there's those financial resources there to work on that match program, because I think that's really important. Delegate Sullivan, over to you. We'd love to hear a little bit about how you are thinking about this, how communities can benefit from the transition from new projects, whether that's clean energy, manufacturing, long duration energy storage, our favorite topic, and
Sure.
how to make sure we're helping them get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we're a little behind Michigan, Jonathan. I look forward to stealing some of your great ideas. we're not behind you on recognizing some of these issues, and we have been working hard on trying to figure out. There's just no question that some localities just have more resources, if nothing else, more staff, in terms of figuring out how to access this money, how to even analyze a proposed project in their locality as to you know, what its benefits to the locality might be. And so we've had some, for instance, we've had at least one I can think of universities step up and say, you know, we'd like to help some of these young, you know, they've got an environmental program. We think our not only our professorial staff, but our graduate students could help some of these communities serve as almost as staff, if you will, to help them try to navigate these things. We're trying to find a way to match those needs with the folks who can provide the services. What comes to mind for me when you're talking about benefits to communities, in some ways, there's still some persuasion that needs to go on. One of the biggest challenge I would say we're facing in Virginia right now has to do with siting and permitting. You know, Jonathan mentioned that Michigan took a big step last year on permitting reform. I shamelessly stole from the Michigan bill having to do with how to site where a state would site solar facilities, and got a good conversation started. We didn't get anything passed, but we got a good conversation started in Virginia, because what I think a lot of states around the country are facing is, you know, a state goal, a state mandated goal, a state priority, which has to be accomplished with typically permits granted in Virginia's case, 130 different localities. And some of them are more open to these things than others. Candidly, there's some misinformation out there when a particular solar project gets proposed. You know, we have people coming from all over, certainly from outside those local jurisdictions, weighing in with, in some cases, you know, some misinformation, and it becomes a real question of how much of this should be state, you know, how much of this should the state, I don't want to use the word control, but influence, and how much of this can and should we leave to localities. And frankly, as we all know, a solar facility of 2024, very different than a solar facility of just 4, 5, 6 years ago in terms of its sophistication, its recognition of its impact on the locality. Agrivoltaics, you know, help address issues of taking agricultural land off of the you know, out of the system. And so we are working in the General Assembly. I will be putting in legislation again to try to figure out how to strike those balances. I find frustrating sometimes, you know, the stories of locality that will reject a facility either based on misinformation or out of concern for somehow or another a loss to that locality. The great stories are ones where I had one city manager come to me and say, or a county manager come to me and say, you know, our fire department, our volunteer fire department had the members had all moved out of the county. We had no fire department, and we now have this new solar facility, which because of its siting agreement is now allowing us to pay for a professionalized fire department for our county, which we would not have been able to do absent this solar facility coming to town. So those are the kinds of benefits that we know are out there for localities. Sometimes they don't recognize it. Sometimes there's opposition to it despite that. A recent locality rejected a solar plant in a locality that had just lost its one major manufacturing plant in another sector, and they were facing a giant tax increase. Now a whole bunch of unemployed people, but they rejected a solar facility mostly out of sort of fear of losing agricultural land, which is I understand the issue. So what we're trying to do is figure out how to bring all that together, figure out how we get to our state goals while honoring local decision-making authority. And Michigan took a real good step in my view, and we're still trying to figure that out in Virginia. And in my way of thinking, it is the most important issue we need to solve, because one of the things we've done is attract all this new business to Virginia. The solar companies are here; they want to build, but we're sort of stuck in many ways in terms of siting and then in permitting. So we'll be spending a lot of time, I think, in this session and subsequent sessions trying to figure that out.
Yeah, thanks for being willing to share some of those stories with us. I think definitely, not to call back to Peter's presentation too much, but community engagement, I think, comes up a lot in terms of when communities see some new kind of technology coming into their homes and they're really concerned about what that's going to look like. We hear often that there's not yet enough dialogue and engagement with those communities to ensure that, we're combating misinformation, we're understanding the concerns. Maybe there's ways to adjust projects so that, like you mentioned, agrivoltaics, we can preserve some of that agricultural value while also being able to deploy these projects. So really appreciate that you're working on this. I think permitting, something we hear.
I was at a facility. I think this is true. I think they told me it's the largest solar facility east of the Mississippi, right here in Virginia. And the fellow I spent the most time with, the fellow I found with the most compelling story, is the fellow in charge of working with the local farmers who bring their sheep to graze at the facility. The facility saves on mowing the lawn. The farmers can use their ground for other things. Profit margins are through the roof. The local farming community, which I dare say several years ago might not have thought too highly of this facility that was coming to town, suddenly are thrilled by it, because it's helping them raise their sheep. So those are the kinds of synergies you can find if you just work hard enough at it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's such a great story. Everyone can kind of picture what that looks like to have sheep walking around grazing under some solar panels. So I think that's such a compelling.
If I had it ready, I'd put up on screen the picture of me and the sheep.
I love it. We'll bring it up for next time. All right. So I know we're coming up to our Q&A portion. I want to bring us to one more question, which is on workforce development. Jonathan, I know you talked quite a bit about this already, but workforce development and readiness is an issue that we hear about from communities all across the country, especially as, we were talking earlier about shifting technologies, how things that we thought were going to be decades off a couple of years ago are now staring us right in the face. So how are you both thinking about workforce development, readiness, supporting those workers in transition? And that's, I think, both for workers that are already working in the field and they need to transition to kind of new energy industries, but also when we're thinking about young people who maybe are going to graduate soon, have just graduated, or thinking about building a career in these new kinds of industries. So Jonathan, you look like you're ready to go. I'm going to go over to you.
Sure. Well, yeah, I think, the great thing about doing this work is that we all get to take inspiration from what we're seeing happen in other places. And so while Michigan's had some success, and glad to hear that's been a source of inspiration for Virginia on permitting, we know that talent and workforce are one of the most critical issues for every employer when they're thinking about where to make an investment. We saw that firsthand when we saw the Amazon HQ2 decision to go to Northern Virginia, largely based on the workforce and talent available there, and the investments that Virginia has made into workforce and talent in higher ed. And so we've been a little behind, but trying to catch up with some of what Virginia has done. On the workforce side, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that the federally funded, state administered workforce system is really designed to solve a problem from previous generations. It was really sort of this Great Recession problem of you have a bunch of workers who become dislocated. We have high unemployment rates, lots of folks who are looking for work, and then jobs are hard to find. And so the role of the workforce system is really funnel the best and most qualified candidates to these very hard to find jobs, and then surge training to everybody else to try to get them the skills they need to get gainfully employed again. We don't have that problem in 2024. The problem we have in 2024 is that we have very low unemployment. But we have higher than and workforce participation is not as high as we would like it to be. So the workforce system doesn't have the kind of flexible dollars we need to solve that problem, because it's not really a training issue. It's an issue related to finding folks who are out of the workforce, not because they're lazy or because they don't want to work, but because they have a barrier. And that might be childcare, it might be transportation, it might be a mental health issue or a criminal background check, or it might be their a woman or a minority, or English is not their first language, and they're trying to get a job in a field that historically has, not really sought out those types of candidates. They primarily hired folks that look like me. And so, trying to help fund programming that reduces barriers, that helps employers do a better job of accessing pools of talent where they are, as well as building, on-the-job training programs like apprenticeships into their the suite of services that they provide. Because again, those are the barrier removal, on-the-job training. There's not a lot of federal funding in the WIOA system, the workforce system, for those types of activities. And so, we've been working to try to identify ways to bring folks together, folks who are not necessarily traditionally part of workforce conversations. Stephanie, you all did a great job of helping facilitate some of that in Detroit. But bringing folks to the table and saying, what are the challenges that we are collectively facing? How do we think creatively about bringing new resources to the table to try to address some of these challenges in ways that are new and creative? And so, we've seen a lot of success so far. As I mentioned, Michigan was designated as the EV workforce hub by the Biden-Harris administration, and we've been working to bring folks together. Look at what are the ways that we can bring some new resources to the table, address some of these gaps in funding. What are the ways that we can scale and expand programming that exists and that we know works, so that we can reduce the cost of developing new curriculum by scaling things that are already there. The other piece of it you mentioned is that career readiness and career awareness. And so that's I think a big challenge in many states. In Michigan, we have not had the focus on career and technical education that we would like. And so you're seeing a lot of effort right now to push back into some of the middle schools and high schools, so that young people are getting the skills earlier, but also the exposure to some of what these exciting careers of the future will be. So that has been a lot of our focus. We're seeing I think a lot of success, but still facing a lot of challenge, because we have a lot of folks in this country who again have fallen out of the workforce for one way or one reason or the other. Their skills have not stayed up to date, and so finding those folks and getting them to a point where they are able to enroll in a training course or start work with an employer, a big challenge, much bigger challenge than just making sure that they have the right skills, the right training, that they're enrolled in the right courses. So that's where we're really focused. But again, can't do that alone. It requires a high degree of cooperation, not just from our federal partners, but from our local partners on the ground as well, local workforce agencies, community colleges, nonprofits. So it's labor intensive. It involves a lot of conversation, a lot of collaboration, but sort of similar point that Rip was making around that community acceptance. If you don't have those folks at the table, it's going to be really, really hard to design solutions that are actually going to work and move things forward. So, it's a really important piece of this that we can't leave behind.
Yeah, sounding like collaboration is the theme of the day, certainly, and definitely something across the workforce space that's really, really powerful. Delegate Sullivan, I'm going to go to you. Some workforce conversations. I know we've had a lot in offshore wind, talking about the new jobs that are coming in, lots of work happening at the state level. Anything you want to highlight on that side? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Just a couple thoughts, Stephanie. Yes, Virginia is in the process of building what I think will be the largest offshore wind facility, I think in the country, certainly on the East Coast. And that is spinning off all sorts of jobs. Jonathan mentioned in his comments community colleges. One of the things we're working really hard on doing is involving our community colleges in our workforce development issues here in Virginia, including in the clean energy space. because they are the drivers of such a large percentage of folks, who want to get, as Jonathan suggests, either back into the workforce or into the workforce for the first time. Virginia long ago passed that, it's our curves passed. Virginia was a coal state. We have coal and tobacco. We've long ago passed the curves have passed where we have more people in the clean energy economy than we do in the coal economy in Virginia. And it's been a question we've been working on, and Jonathan suggests, how hard it is. Okay, these folks are making a living in the coal industry. How do we connect them with the solar developers who need workers, with people in the battery space who need people to be building things. So it is an ongoing struggle. We have, I think the title is Chief Workforce Officer at the administration, which I think is not just symbolically shows the focus that we think this issue requires, but actually is working hard to enhance what we're doing. I do talk to developers all the time who need to find people, and there is, I think it's still a pilot program, but I think a bunch of developers and a community college have put together a sort of certificate program for the solar energy space. Go to this training program, and I don't know how long it lasts, but by the end of it, you are a qualified solar installer. And so that's the kind of thing we need to do more of, it seems to me.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so I'm seeing some very great questions coming in. So we're gonna see how many we can get through in the next 10 minutes. I want to stay kind of on the same theme. We have a question about entrepreneurship. So thinking about, I know both your states are well known for being great places to start businesses, to do business. Virginia, I live here in Virginia, and hear a lot about Virginia as a place to kind of start up new innovative businesses. So talk to us a little bit about entrepreneurship in the clean energy space, and what benefit does that bring? How can that help promote both the industry, communities, workers? Delegate Sullivan, why don't we start with you?
Well, Jonathan, thank you for mentioning the HQ2 location. That was just an electrifying, pardon the pun, moment. Less well known is the fact that Virginia Tech, our beloved Virginia Tech University, is now well on its way to finishing a sort of a satellite campus, but frankly, it's much more than a satellite campus, sort of in the shadow of HQ2 here in Northern Virginia, in between Arlington and Alexandria, where you are, Stephanie. And the whole notion was to create a location, but more importantly, sort of a frame of mind, if you will, of entrepreneurship in the tech sector generally, and certainly in the clean energy space, with attracting folks from all over the Washington metropolitan region, and frankly all over the country, to that part of the world, to get engaged in whatever new company they might want to start. So we're trying to create that mindset here in Virginia, and Amazon and tech sort of are working together, both literally and figuratively, to make that happen.
Yeah, definitely. That was a really exciting announcement to see and to watch be built up. Jonathan, to you.
Yeah, so it's supporting entrepreneurship is incredibly important. 100% of net job creation comes from high growth startups that are 5 years old or less. It is, if you look at the history, or where jobs are created, older companies, they might grow through acquisition, but they also sometimes, you see this rise and fall in employment. But where the net job creation comes from, it's when Amazon goes from a handful of people in Seattle to being one of the largest employers in the world. That's where you get a lot of job growth, and it's also where you see per capita income skyrocket, not just for folks who work in tech, but for everyone who lives in the communities and regions who, where you have a growth and innovation focused economy. Michigan, in many ways, did not get the benefit of economic growth that we saw accrue to many other places like Northern Virginia in the 2000s, 2010s. The software focused tech innovation, it did accrue to a lot of places, Silicon Valley and Austin and Seattle and Northern Virginia, New York, Boston. But we didn't really see a lot of that kind of growth in Michigan. What's really exciting about clean energy is that a lot of the innovation is happening in hard tech. This is a type of innovation where Michigan has just a massive amount of advantage, not just in terms of our workforce that has so many skilled engineers, but the institutions and the assets that are available to an entrepreneur who wants to come to Michigan to launch a hardware, hard tech startup. They're enormous. We've got, amazing institutions that can help you design your prototype, that can help you figure out how to get pilot scale manufacturing capacity. We've got manufacturers that can help you get to commercial scale manufacturing capacity using things like contract manufacturing. So you don't have to build your own factory to get your product to market. We're seeing a huge amount of new investment, lots and lots of different ratings and rankings that have shown, particularly Detroit, but Michigan in general is one of the fastest growing, one of the most vibrant tech ecosystems in the country right now. No better example of that than the investment that Ford made in Michigan Central in bringing New Lab in to help incubate some of these mobility and clean energy startups. There was a great story in the New York Times, I think just this past weekend, a couple of stories about everything that's happening in Detroit and all the exciting things that are happening there, including a story focusing on many of the clean energy and mobility related startups that are being incubated right now, at New Lab, at Michigan Central, companies that are making, next generation electrified outdoor recreation vehicles, companies that are creating amazingly innovative ways to safely store batteries so that you reduce the risk of fire in places where that is a critically important safety issue. So, really, really important for us as a state to recapture some of the innovation economy that we saw go to other places, because again, it's not just because these are cool companies doing interesting things, making cool technology. It's because these high growth innovation startups, you get a more diversified economy, which means you're more protected from the ups and downs of the business cycle. You get increased GDP and increased per capita income, and so what that means is more shared prosperity, not just for the folks who are coming in some of these very highly paid roles as engineers or on the technical side, but again, the benefits really do accrue throughout the economy. The folks who are selling goods and services into those high growth companies really benefit as well. So something we're very, very focused on. The governor just announced the state's first chief innovation ecosystem officer earlier this year. His name is Ben Marciona, and he's been in place a few months now over at MEDC, our economic development organization. So place of significant investment for the state and something that we think is really well timed for the type of innovation we're seeing in the clean energy economy.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really cool that we're both that you both have talked about some new roles at the chief kind of officer level that really show that the states are really prioritizing these areas. We're prioritizing innovation, prioritizing workforce by really dedicating state level leadership and support to it. So that's fantastic. One more question I'm seeing, it looks like there's multiple people asking this, but talking a little bit more about community trust for new kinds of projects. We talked a lot about opposition to solar projects. I know there are other projects, even manufacturing facilities, that communities sometimes are really skeptical of. So can you talk a little bit about what the best way is to build trust among communities around these different types of projects that they might be skeptical of, in ways maybe that even some of our listeners might be able to take home with them and try when they're working on their own projects and community engagement processes?
Well, I will tell you, I talk to solar developers all the time as they work with localities to try to get approvals, and it's clear to me that they've essentially realized that they need their own sort of community relations / political operations departments. They need to be on the ground. This can't be show up at the hearing and make your case. So they need to be on the ground, talking to local homeowners associations, talking to the Rotary clubs, the chambers of commerce, because while everyone knows what a solar panel is, it's new and scary sometimes, and understandably so. And in some ways, it's like the kind of NIMBY you always get, whether you're building a a house next door that the neighbors don't like for one reason or another, or whether you want 500 acres to put a solar installation on that the neighbors are worried is going to create runoff. And gee, I hear solar installations cause cancer, et cetera, et cetera. So there is still a huge education component as to what these types of installations are, and perhaps more importantly, what they are not. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of person power to go out there and work not just the politicians, the local politicians, but work the neighborhoods, work the neighbors, and convince people that this is not as scary as they think, and could have huge economic benefits to them.
Yeah, I think all of that is exactly right. And I'll maybe say something slightly different, which is I think one of the ways that we can get around some of the community acceptance issues is to think about what kind of project we're putting and whether or not it's a project that is fits within the cultural heritage of that community, that would be one that would be readily accepted. We've seen a lot of investment going into states that is, on the production side for some of these manufacturing roles, where they're going into greenfield sites in rural communities. And, I grew up in a rural community. If someone had proposed to put a factory there, I mean, my parents made a choice to live in that community. They wanted to live 20 minutes outside of town because they wanted to live further away from where the factories were. And so, we're sort of asking people to accept something that they have already made an affirmative choice by choosing to live where they live that they don't want. It's not to say you can't get around that, but it is to say that we have, particularly in Michigan, a lot of historic manufacturing communities that have a lot of great sites that are ready to go, that are already close to a workforce. They're close to electricity. They're hooked up to the grid. They have all of the benefits of a site that is ready to go. There has been, I think, in the past, some reluctance to go look at brownfield sites, which is because of the cost associated with redevelopment. But I think we're starting to see folks change in that regard. And, one of the things that we're focused on through the Community Worker Economic Transition Office is, how do we start to go find and begin a conversation with manufacturers today so to get them thinking about diversification and conversion, not just into things like EVs if they're making ICE components, but thinking about making things for the energy supply chain. If you're making parts or components for a vehicle related to heat management, maybe you can make a heat pump for a residential application. Or if you're making brackets and fittings for an automotive application, you could make brackets and fittings for a utility need as well. And so we've got some active work we're doing with our large investor-owned utilities to understand what their capital budgets look like, what their supply chain needs are, so that we can go find some of the manufacturers who will be looking for a diversification opportunity as a way to hedge against some of the ICE to EV risk, and we can move them into these new clean energy supply chains as a way to get around some of the siting permitting, some of the community acceptance issues, and to make sure that existing workforce doesn't lose a job and have to get retrained, that local community doesn't have to worry about a gap in municipal revenue or someone who's going to drop out of the water utility. I mean, there are real consequences when you see some of these large manufacturers, even small manufacturers, go out of business, and the challenges associated with getting a site back up and running are significant. So sort of short-circuiting some of that and getting more and more folks to think about looking at an existing manufacturer or an existing industrial site rather than just do what they have done often in the past 20 or 30 years, which is go to states that don't have Michigan's history and legacy of manufacturing and try to force a manufacturing opportunity onto a rural community that might not necessarily want it.
Great. Well, we are at time. That was an excellent way to end the conversation. So I just want to thank you both so much, Delegate Sullivan, Jonathan Smith. Thank you so much for joining us today. We had a really great conversation. We look forward to continuing that conversation. And to everyone who is listening, feel free to continue the conversation with us on social media or by subscribing to our monthly newsletter. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you both so much for your time.
Enjoy being with you.
Thank you.